All right, for this exercise, we're looking at the Gonstead listing system for upper cervical, mainly C1. So Occiput, C1, C2. That's what we're looking at in this demonstration. For C1, there are 4 letters that designate the listing system in the Gonstead method. A for anterior, then either S or I for superior or inferior, and then right or left for laterality, and then A or P on the side of laterality, whether it's gone anterior or posterior. And when we say where it's gone, we're looking at the static position. Gonstead likes to list the static position or the malposition, so that when we adjust, we don't move the vertebrae in a direction that pushes it even further away from what we would consider like an optimum curvature of the spine, or an optimum rotation of the vertebrae, or an optimum tilt or laterality. So we want to try to help things move closer to where they should be, but in the Gonstead system, we're not necessarily pushing it where we think it should be. We're helping the body kind of realign itself to where the body believes it should be. That's my opinion. Okay, so here we are at the occiput, and we're at the first cervical vertebrae up top here, and then we've got the second cervical vertebrae, which you can see is like this huge spinous right here. It's the one that's easily palpable. When we come off the EOP of the occiput and we move down, the first thing we bump into is the C2 spinous, and then buried really deep is going to be the posterior arch of atlas and your TPs on each side of atlas, and we can palpate the TPs pretty easily underneath the mastoid process of the skull. All right, so first of all, what is the first letter for the Gonstead listing for C1? I will show you. It is always the letter A, because the first cervical vertebrae will always move anterior. The reason for that is because the dens of the C2 vertebrae is positioned immediately behind the anterior arch of the atlas. Therefore, this vertebrae cannot move posterior because there's a bony structure preventing that from happening. When you look at all the other listings in the Gonstead system, they usually start with a P, because everywhere else down the spine, the malposition is posterior. But with the atlas, the first letter is always A. The second letter is for the tilt of the vertebrae. If the anterior tubercle on the front side of the vertebrae here, if the anterior tubercle tilts superior, then it's an S. And if it tilts inferior, it's an I. So the second letter is usually an S, all right? It can be an I, but usually in the Gonstead, in my experience, everything is usually a S, not AI, even though it can happen. The third letter is for the laterality. What that means is when we look at the first vertebrae, has this vertebrae statically malpositioned towards the right? If it's gone to the right, then it's going to be, the third letter is going to be R for right. And if it's gone to the left, then the third letter is going to be an L. Whichever direction of our laterality, that's what we're then going to figure out the final letter. Has that laterality gone anterior or posterior? So let's get back to the A of the listing system. Has it gone anterior? Well, that's the only thing it can do. Has it gone with a superior tilt or an inferior tilt? We're going to guess that it's gone superior. Theoretically, if a patient presents and they have a superior atlas, they're going to be kind of like looking down their nose at you. That's an exaggeration, but if their head is tilted in a malposition where they're looking down, that even further confirms that they probably have an atlas that's in a superior tilt position. If they have a look where they're kind of like looking over the top of their glasses at you, then they probably have an inferior atlas. And that could be also a malposition of the occiput. It could be a malposition or maybe a forward head carriage. There's many variables that can contribute to that. But theoretically, if it's gone AS, they're looking down their nose at you. And if it's gone AI, they're going to be looking over the top of their glasses at you if they wear glasses. All right? So that's AS or I. Now, for the laterality, I'm going to place my fingers up underneath the TPs of the atlas. I'm going to come up underneath and feel for and put a pressure kind of I to S into those TPs. Then I'm going to take my hand on the top of the patient's head and I'm going to laterally flex their head towards the right and then bring it back towards the left. Towards the right and towards the left. When you're thinking about laterality, is there more of a restriction? Does it feel like it hits into something and gets stuck earlier than when we go in the opposite direction? So in this case, we're going to say the person has a right laterality. I'm clearly pretending here at this moment, but if I had my finger up underneath their right TP of atlas and I'm palpating their head and I'm pushing it away from me, and it feels like, man, that doesn't really want to go in that direction very well, but then I bring it back towards me and it feels like, well, that's much easier, then I have a right laterality because the restriction is on the right side. So what to think of when that happens is that the atlas has moved right. And when it does that, we're going to have a restriction in right lateral bending, and we're going to have kind of a swelling, an inflammation between CO and C1, between C1 and C2. And it's going to feel maybe tender on this side. It's going to feel like there's a restriction in lateral flexion. And so we're going to name this ASR. ASR. All right? Now for the fourth and final letter, we have to decide on the side of laterality, has this TP of atlas statically malpositioned anterior, or has it statically malpositioned posterior, or maybe it's neither of those and it has statically malpositioned dead center, and so we're going to say it's an ASR dash, or like a hyphen, because there is no designation for A or P. That doesn't happen very often. When we have a patient that presents with a ASRA, this is what you're going to feel for. And this is very complicated. I have a really hard time explaining it, and I hope that we'll get it through to you on this try. I have 3 different positions where I will do lateral flexion and kind of feel for the level of restriction as I do this. What's happening when I laterally flex the atlas onto C2, I'm feeling for, does it hit the vertebrae below? Does C1 bounce into C2, and does that bounce feel less or more when I move it to the next position? So the first position, we're going to call it position 1. That's the middle position. The 3 positions are either lateral flexion in the middle, lateral flexion with it slightly rotated posterior, so towards the posterior, and then back towards position 1, which is straight lateral flexion, or is it position 3, where I give it slight anterior rotation and I laterally flex. So 1, 2, 1, 3. I'm trying to feel for when does the vertebrae of C1 fall to the right the easiest. So when I'm in the neutral position or in position 1, I'm going to feel that. Then I'm going to go to position 2 and I'm going to feel that. Was position 2 easier to laterally flex or harder to laterally flex in relation to the first position? And then after I decide that, I'm going to go back to the first position and I'm going to feel the lateral flexion in the first position in relation to the feel of the lateral flexion in the anterior position, what I'm now calling position 3. So position 1, what's that feel like? And I just kind of put that in my head. I don't really give it a name or a value. And then I go to position 2. Is now the restriction more or less? And in this case, for this exercise, we're going to say that it's more. I feel like when I bend to the right in the neutral or in the middle, I feel a little restriction, and I'm just going to feel, how does that feel in comparison to position 1? How does it now feel in relation to position 2? And I feel in position 2, man, it does not move as easy as it did in position 1. So I feel more of a restriction when I go into position 2 into right lateral flexion than I did in position 1. So I'm feeling this, and then I'm going to position 2 and I'm feeling this. Now I'm going to go back and retrain my brain of what position 1 feels like and compare that to position 3 where I go anterior and feel it. And now it feels less, way less actually. So I'm going to give this a grade that position 1 is a little, position 2 is definitely more, position 1 is again a little less, but then position 3 is way less, like the vertebrae just kind of falls over. Now that's because in the static malposition, if the atlas starts, now just the first cervical vertebrae starts malpositioned with the TP slightly forward, when I laterally flex the head in position 1, it's going to hit the vertebrae below, but it doesn't really hit it solid. And then when I go to position 2, I'm going to bring it back a hair. Now I've taken this malposition TP and I'm putting it directly over the top of the vertebrae below, and I hit into it solid. So that's why it feels like it's more of a hit. And then I go back to position 1 and it feels like it's falling off a little bit easier. There's less restriction. And then when I take that TP that was already slightly anterior in relation to everything else, I'm now going to put it in position 3 where I rotate it even further anterior, and now it doesn't hit the vertebrae under it hardly at all. And so it kind of falls off. So in this case, we know that this vertebrae, the C1 TP, has gone right and it's malpositioned itself anterior. Why is this important? Because we would not want to put someone in a position to adjust them and rotate that TP even further forward when we go to adjust it, because that would be putting it even further out of its natural, normal position in relation to the rest of the spine. Let's give it some help and let's bring it back to where it should be and then do the adjustment. And hopefully that'll help the restriction that's occurring, the segmental motion, the coupled movements of the spine. Hopefully with the adjustment we will bring that person closer to allowing their body, their spine, to kind of balance itself out. I want to also talk a second about how the position of the vertebrae may affect what the patient looks like. When I'm looking at a real person and I'm just visualizing how they appear, if they have an A vertebrae, you're really not going to see a difference because they all go A. If you have an S for the second letter, I said they're going to be kind of looking down their nose at you because they're tilted upwards. So in order to see, they got to look down. And if they've gone inferior, they're going to be kind of looking over the top of the ridge of their glasses at you. If they have a right lateral flexion restriction where this upper portion of the occiput will not close down on C1 that well, then they're going to present with maybe a slight left lateral flexion head tilt to start. They're going to have a left lateral flexion malposition occiput because of the inflammation that's occurring over here and because of the restriction movement. And then finally, if we've decided that that TP has gone anterior, that is a right rotation malposition. That means that their nose, that their ear on the right side is going to move anterior, that their nose is going to move towards the left. That when you look at them from behind, you're going to see more of their left ear coming back towards you and more of their right ear moving away from you. You're going to see maybe a little bit of their cheek on this left side when you're standing behind them and looking from the posterior and seeing less of their cheek on the right because of the static malposition. Once you know the static malposition, you can then come up with a number of different adjustments that you've learned all through the curriculum at chiropractic school. And one of my favorites for the Atlas is to do the seated cervical, where we will use our thumb contact and get on the TP, and we'll stand behind the patient, and we'll take a contact that pushes across the patient. And since this person has an ASRA, I want to bring that back a slight amount. I want to take that anterior TP and bring it back before I adjust, and I'm going to push across and adjust. We'll get into that further, how to adjust and how to set the patient up. But I wanted you to get a better understanding of the static palpation of the Atlas and try to determine the 4-letter listing. And like I said, this in this case it's an ASRA. I hope that helps. Good luck practicing.